Thank you, Mr. Craner. I had an opportunity over the weekend to meet with 7 Egyptians. They were from Cairo and Alexandria. Recently came from Egypt, and here's what they shared with me. Their observation was that the Egyptian Brotherhood did not start this uprising, as they called it. That it came from young professionals. But they said that if the Brotherhood gets the upper hand, that they felt that eventually it would be a bloody terror for those who did not subscribe to the fundamentalist approach of the Brotherhood. And they said, if you want to see how this will play out, think of what happened to the Baha'i in Iran. Think of what happened to the students and to the young democratic enthusiasts that went to the streets against the Shah and then ultimately found themselves in prison or shot when the fundamentalist regime came to power. They said, it's the fate of the guillotine, basically, if the revolution goes the wrong way afterwards. And here was their point. They said the Brotherhood is a group that does not believe in pluralism. There's no equality for women. There's no equality under their conception here for non-Muslims or for Muslims who deviate from their own viewpoint. So they say they've embraced elections as a means to power, basically. And given their past history, why, in their view, why shouldn't there be qualifications in which any candidate that doesn't support pluralism is not going to run? Because otherwise it's going to be a situation where you're going to have one election, one free election one time, because they view this group as hell-bent on this path. So I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you, should they not be allowed to participate? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Brotherhood's lack of democratic bona fides. Now, the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is the effort that the U.S. made some years ago with Hernando de Soto. This is the other issue they wanted to share with me, the utter corruption in that society. And Hernando de Soto, the Peruvian economist, went there in 2004, did a massive study, and found that gaining legal title to a vacant piece of land takes 10 years. To open a bakery takes, 500 days. You've got 56 government agencies you have to go through. Well, they were telling me about this process in Egypt. 20 bribes to open a small company. So they said, look at the consequences of that. He brings that plan forward in the Egyptian cabinet to unlock an amount of capital in Egypt 100 times more than that of what we give Egypt in support, right? And they have a minister in Egypt that supports a reform to bring transparency to the legal system. And this guy is sacked. And as a consequence, as De Soto said, hidden forces of the status quo blocked crucial elements of the reform. You cannot get reform under the current system. And this is something else I wanted to ask you to respond to. In the United States, here we have a U.S.-funded study that helps institute crucial legal and institutional reforms that's blocked by the government. Do we object? Do we protest? Do we register a complaint? Do we threaten to cut off aid? I mean, I think, situations like this in the future, does this even get to the ambassador's attention? What do we do about this level of corruption in a regime? If you could respond.
In a place that is so corrupt as Egypt, I don't think a plan like Hernando de Soto's could move forward. I think it would take a different kind of system. Here I would point to Georgia, which under Shevardnadze was one of the most corrupt countries in the former Soviet Union, which is quite a claim. They have moved forward dramatically under their new government to end corruption. I think when Saakashvili came into power, over 90% of the people reported they had to pay a bribe within the previous 3 months. Now it's exactly the opposite. But I don't think in a system that on corruption is rotten to the core, you're going to see any kind of change. There's too many people who have their hand in the till under this system. It is changeable, as Georgia has shown, but not under this system. I think on the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood, you and I faced this issue in South Africa almost 20 years ago about whether certain parties were going to be allowed to run. And at that time, the issue was whether or not they were committed to nonviolence. And I think those kind of conditions are very, very fair. It shouldn't be that people who are against pluralism or pro-violence are allowed to, be violent on a Tuesday and stand for election on a Thursday.
Right. Well, I thank you, Mr. Craner. I'm going to go to Mr. Satloff for any observations on that as well.
Two brief observations about the political system and its potential evolution vis-a-vis the Muslim Brotherhood. There is currently a constitutional clause in Egypt that no party based on religion is allowed. It will be for the Egyptians to determine whether that gets amended. Should they ask the United States or the U.S. Embassy for its advice, I would urge that we should not advocate for changing that fundamental principle. Secondly, there is some discussion about the order of elections, presidential, parliamentary, etc. It makes much sense that there be a presidential election before there's a new parliamentary election. Under the Egyptian constitution, the chances of a moderate, liberal-minded presidential victor are far greater than a parliamentary outcome that would lead similarly